Hey everyone, in today's video, I'll be sharing with you how Magnus Carlsen completely outplays Vladimir Kramnik so much that there's actually been a decrease in popularity of players choosing to play this opening as black just because how astonishingly well Magnus Carlsen manages to create some sort of game plan here for white that's simple to follow. So getting to the game, Magnus starts out with the Queen's Gambit and he opts for the exchange, and quickly we get some sort of semi-Slav type structure which is pretty common. And here after e3, black plays bishop f5, and this is the opening line that I've been talking about, which I mentioned has decreased in popularity. And here the main line goes queen f3, and this is what Magnus has played in the game. But a quick side tangent that you might be wondering is, since the light squared bishop developed this early, can't white target the pawn on b7 with his queen? And this is generally a good idea to have at the back of your mind, usually in openings, especially in the Queen's Gambit as white. But in this particular case it doesn't work because black gets in queen b6, and let's just say you throw in a couple of trades, you leave him with double pawns. It isn't all that impressive because black actually uses his double pawns to advantage by basically pushing them forward in the future. By creating some sort of avalanche, he'll have counterplay, and he'll basically use his bishops as well, along with the semi-open file for his rook. And once he does finish development, he'll bring in his other rook as well. And as you can see the arrows on the board, these aren't the specific moves that he'll be playing, but rather just how you see how all his pieces are well placed to take advantage of this double pawns on the queen side and create some sort of play. So as you see, it's all not that bad for black here. So queen b3 doesn't do much. However, queen f3 on the other hand accomplishes the similar goal of queen b3, but by only leaving him with actual weaknesses. So after queen f3, this light squared bishop has to go back, and here white first trades once, giving up the bishop for the knight, but trades again, and he removes the queens off the board, and he leaves black with weaknesses. And in terms of double pawns on the king side, here black argues usually that he does have the bishop pair, and he can also use his pawns as an advantage by pushing them forward to like f5 and then perhaps f4, trying to poke at white's pawn structure. But as we see in the game, Magnus Carlsen just says no, and he completely turns everything around. And first he starts out with the natural developing move knight f3, and black continues development as well, and then he plays knight h4. And now this gets confusing. It's like, wait a minute, weren't you taught not to move the same piece twice in the opening, and also putting the knight on the rim? And no, it's not for winning the bishop pair back as well. He's not trying to take the bishop back. So if you don't know why, I recommend you try to pause and figure out why if you're a training player. If you're simply here to watch the game and learn, I'll go forward quickly. And again, another peculiar move, playing knight e2, bringing his knight back. But as you see now, I'll explain. The idea was to bring his knights to a position where he would control the f5 square. So he's basically saying these double pawns are a weakness, you can't push them forward, and my knights are well placed to basically stop your pawns from moving forward, and then I'll target them in the future and basically take advantage of them. And yes, he spent a couple of tempi for this, but it is worth it because queens are off the board and he is developing his pieces to act to squares, which actually makes sense. Because if you go back, this knight on c3 wasn't going to do much anyway. It was already restricted by this pawn on c6, and it had no real vision in the future as well. Like knight a4 as well, you don't see the knight going anywhere on the queen side. So he brings it to the king side. He basically uses it to maximum potential. And black here tries to use the fact that white spent too much tempi moving his knights to the other side of the board. He's trying to activate his bishop pair, and he's basically trying to take advantage of this as well. And white king here has two options, and king d1 is the better move because king e2 simply just blocks in your own light squared bishop, and you have to move your king again back to d1 if you want to develop it. So king d1 immediately is the better option. And here black plays knight a4, again another player moving his knight to the rim, but in this case again he's taking advantage of the fact that his bishop pair is nicely controlling the board, and his knight is now creating a threat against the white king and also trying to take the pawn. And here Magnus thinks for a bit and he plays knight f5, knight gf5 in specifically, and it's the fact that the b2 pawn is untakeable. It's a poison pawn basically, and if black does take it immediately, white gets in king c2, and now he's basically using the king to start attacking and taking advantage of the awkward piece placement for black here. Because once the knight drops back, first he snaps it off, and then he brings his rook to b1. Why the h rook, I'll show you in the next few moves, but he's basically threatening to take the bishop, and if the bishop moves away to another square, then the rook infiltrates onto b7. And as you see, first, if even though black tries to keep his bishop there, striking in the center, protecting it, after a3, using his rook on a1, once the bishop drops back, he takes the pawn on b7 back. More importantly, now he's infiltrating into black's position, and at this level it's actually winning for white, and at our level it's still much better, and we should go on to win the game if we just keep on making threats and make good moves and just not blunder anything. And yeah, in this position, as you see, white's pieces are getting really active, black's pawns are kind of scattered, and same with his pieces, his rooks are nowhere near developing. Meanwhile, you're about to double up on the b file and get ready. And going back, taking on b2 is no way to go about it, and if you play a move like knight a4, the king further advances and actually forks both pieces, and even if black tries to create some sort of counterplay, hold everything together, you at least sack, or you at least trade your rook for 2 minor pieces. And here again, you're just better if not winning, because your light square bishop is going to develop, rook is going to find squares and get pawn breaks in where you infiltrate into black's position. Meanwhile, black is still kind of stuck, his rooks aren't active, his king isn't active, your knights are well placed, and you're blocking his light square bishop, you're blocking both his double pawns, which are basically a weakness now. So that's why taking on b2 isn't a great move. You're basically giving white the initiative. So instead here, black plays king d7, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna bring my king in, I'm gonna take advantage of the fact that you've placed your knight on f5 instead of just trying to control f5 square. And here Magnus was basically trying to further get into black's position, and black is like, I'm not gonna allow that, I'm gonna bring my king in and attack you. And that is fine here because the queens are off the board, and this is resembling some sort of an endgame. And here first Magnus plays rook b1 because he wants to play bishop d3, but that allows knight takes b2, and now after king c2, now the knight can just simply trade it off itself for the light squared bishop, which is a key piece for white in this position. And after king e6, white has to play g4 to protect his knight, and black gets in h5, and now he's all of a sudden like activating his pieces. And after a move like h3, he can like take, he activates his rook, like things are getting messy here, and I don't think h3 is even all that great for white here. So this is why rook b1 was important, making sure now that the knight can infiltrate in. And after king e6, now white plays bishop d3, and this knight is actually, it has no point on a4 because now this pawn on b2 is protected, and they're just targets now in the future. You want to kick the dark squared bishop out, and this knight is just, you just leave it there, black has spent no reason why. Meanwhile, when you moved your knight to h4, it has a purpose, it's defending your knight on f5, it is controlling key squares. And here black decides to create counterplay, try to play c5 strike, open up the center, take advantage of this king, and white simply plays king e2, connects his rooks, and is ready to now slowly start expanding on the like king side and queen side, both sides. And here black realizes that he doesn't want a3 to come with tempo, especially if c5 happens, so he goes back. And the reason why all the way back to f8 is so he controls like all these squares, and it's basically a more optimal square for his bishop, trying to control this knight somewhat as well. And here white just continues with g4, further solidifying the f5 square, basically playing around his strengths. And black gets in c5, but it's a bit too late because he has no threats. If he pushes c4, he closes down the position, and you just drop back to c2, you attack this knight with tempo, and you get in h4 next move. And if he takes, which happens in the game, you simply take back. And after black now decides to develop his bishop back to a better square, Magnus simply pushes h4. He's threatening to trap the bishop. He's expanding on the king side, using his knight on f5 as a central central square. And after black decides to strike back with h5, it's a bit too late here. Knights can be tricky, and here Magnus wins a pawn with knight g7 check and taking on h5. And at first glance it looks like now Magnus also has double pawns, but it's actually to his advantage in this case because they're passed, they're on the edge of the board, and the knight here does a really nice job of protecting it. And as you see in the next couple of moves, he brings his knight to e3 and then to g4, so now he's also controlling the h6 square to push his pawn, and now he's also controlling the f6 square as well to gain access, and then later control the h7. So you see how he's finding ways to reroute his knights to cause more problems and control squares that he wants. Earlier it was f5, now it's like the h5 squares in working in tandem with the pawns. And in this position, Vladimir's like, screw it, you can even take my pawn on f6, I have to activate my pieces, I have to get them going. And he admits that his pawns were a weakness, and at this point he's better giving them off and not worrying about them. And here Magnus is like, I'm not gonna even take it. And it's completely fine to mention white is already winning here. Magnus could have taken the pawn on f6, but instead he's like, I'm not even gonna take your pawns. And practically speaking, that's again a good choice, because as a human, you're leaving him with another option at the back of his mind, like, do I protect my pawn, do I not? So it's another thing that he's worrying about. Meanwhile, Magnus is simply developing his rook. There's no point in staying behind his pawns now, and he wants to basically infiltrate in and perhaps even find ways to trade off rooks so he can just promote his pawns. And here, at this point, I can keep explaining every move, but the main gist of it is he's basically trying to activate his pieces to better squares, slowly push his pawns forward, trying to restrict black, and even this rook from trying to get to c4 or whatever. And here he slowly again reroutes his knights. He realizes knight on g4 isn't doing much immediately now anyway, and now he offers a trade of rooks. So he's managed to trade off one pair of rooks. Now again he has to get to this h8 rook to promote his pawn. So now again he's slowly trying to find ways, and he reroutes his knights to better squares. And here Kramnik just gives up a pawn as well, trying to create some sort of room, but at this point black is kind of stuck. And after a couple of rerouting, he brings his rook the other way, and now he finds another way to try to trade rooks. And here he gives a check, he trades off a couple pieces, and as you see, after a couple of moves here, he has a nice tactic, knight d7 check, deflecting the black knight. So now he basically promotes his pawn, and he's completely winning here. And yeah, black has no hope, and Kramnik resigned. And if you look back at the game, you really see no clear way that black went wrong. If you go back, he simply developed his pieces while Magnus was like moving his knight the same knight twice, both of them, but there's nothing much he could have done. And once he manages to get his knights there, again he tries to take advantage of the fact that he spent too much time on his knights. But again, accurate moves, playing moves like king d1, keeping the b2 pawn poisoned, and then rook b1, bringing the light square bishop when he has to. More importantly, when the pawn was poisoned, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, he plays knight f5, and he's not just like eyeing that f5 square, he actively brings a piece to that f5 square, like making sure like really well like black can't push f5, and he's also further activating his knight instead of just leaving it on g3, and that allows moves like g4, further reinforcing and expanding. So that's a really key concept here. And yeah, again, he simply develops his pieces, and from there he doesn't look back. And it's all about this, just using your opponent's weaknesses and keep on putting pressure. And as you play more games, you'll start to find better piece placements like king d1, and then leaving room for your bishop. So I hope you learned something from this game today, and please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed it so far, and I'll try to keep coming, try to get more content out like this. And I'll also make opening videos, specific middle game strategies like pawn breaks, pawn structures, whatnot, endgame tips. I'll keep a bunch of videos coming out, so stay tuned and see you later. Bye.